Hey guys, so we just had YCS São Paulo as well as YCS Vancouver, so as usual I wanted to go over some of the most played hand traps and staples among the topping deck lists that were available to help you prepare for your event. So before we continue, big thanks to my sponsors as always. I'm also really excited to announce that I'm now sponsored by Team Sam and for his amazing Supreme Pro sleeves as well as playmats, so you can certainly use code HAKUNA10 for 10% off on his store that you can check out in the link description below. Now, in terms of the topping deck lists that were publicly available for me to sort of do this analysis, there were essentially about 49 deck lists available among the two different YCS events, with Unchained, of course, being the most represented, at least in the deck lists that were included in this video, and also just in general in the overall top cut. So to provide an overview of the hand trap count, it ranged from 0 to 18 with a median of 9 hand traps in the main deck, and so this was actually about the same as when I did this analysis a couple weeks ago or a few weeks ago, sort of in the early stages of Duelist Nexus format, but that was based on just regional level events only. Now in terms of hand traps in the side, this ranged from 0 to 12 with a median of 5, which is slightly higher than when I did this analysis a few weeks ago. Now, of course, compare that to some of the going second board breakers, then the median was about 6, which again is actually a little bit higher than when I did the analysis a few weeks ago. And actually, even in the side, it actually went up a little bit as well, which is kind of interesting because essentially, typically if you see like, hand trap count go up, then you usually see like the board break count go down because of course there's only so much room in your deck. I think perhaps one way to explain this trend is maybe that, maybe some of the more decks that are topping lately are just those that have a lot of space for non-engine compared to the decks that topped in like a few weeks ago when I initially did this analysis. And on top of that, perhaps maybe even those same decks are just trying to fit more non-engine cards as well, or it could just be more of a one-off event too. So let's just go over the most played hand traps in the topping deck lists that were publicly available, and Ash was in fact reclaimed its spot as the #1 hand trap. So when I did this analysis a few weeks ago, which is like early stages of Dune, with some regional level events, Droll was actually #1 because people were probably afraid of, like Mannadium going into the new format. But I think now people have kind of realized that, Mannadium perhaps is actually more so of like a tier 2 deck at best. And so I think Ash is just back on its usual #1 spot. It can hit pretty much every deck. Unchained is kind of like the most represented deck recently as well. And when I surveyed those Unchained players in terms of their key strengths and weaknesses, which you can certainly check out, they actually did mention Ash can actually be quite impactful against that strategy. It really depends though. And of course, let's say you have something like Chimera that's been popular lately as well, and kind of interesting enough, while they do play Branded Fusion, Ashing Mirror Knight is actually quite deadly as well, and really just hits a lot of decks. You also have Imperm. I think part of the reason it's so high in play, aside from the fact that it is good, don't get me wrong, it's just that you're just seeing more and more triple tactics talent and thrust being played, which you'll see shortly in this video as well. And so Imperm just very good right now. I mean, especially if you're a deck, let's say you fold to something like Arise Heart Banished, then you at least it's useful even when you go second and you draw it as your 6th card. You also have Nibiru, which actually creeped up a little bit compared to a few weeks ago when I did this. And especially with like Unchained kind of becoming really popular. Again, in that survey video, Unchained players actually did put Nibiru as like the #1 hand trap that they respected. Although keep in mind, at the time that I did that survey, which was kind of early days of Dune, I think a lot of the players that responded, they weren't really playing like the tour guide stuff, which from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you kind of play like the tour guide line, which a lot of the topping lists are actually seeming to play now, I think you're a little bit Nibiru proof in that regard. You also have now Droll again kind of falling, and perhaps maybe it falls even more, but you never know. It is very format dependent, and so especially kind of similar to like Nibiru, when you're not respecting Droll, then who knows, maybe this next YCS level event, maybe a lot of Mannadium players decide, what, this is our chance, let's do it. Because something like Mannadium, if they go first and you don't have Droll, it's honestly quite difficult, especially with kind of the board setup that they have in counting that counter trap. So Droll can be really good, but honestly, from my experience in this current format, it has not been too amazing. Next, we have Bestial Druid Swarm. So usually I actually combine like all the Bestials together in terms of like this video, like analysis. But now I think I actually kind of have to split between Druid Swarm and Magma Nut again, just because Druid Swarm, it does have some pretty interesting application in the current format, just because it does send. So again, something like Unchained where they kind of trigger when they're destroyed, being able to send instead is actually kind of nice. And related to Bestial Druisworm, of course, you're also going to have Bestial Magma, which, you know, if you're playing Druisworm, you're most likely also playing Magma, just because it's something that's going to search off that Druisworm in the end phase. So Bestials can be very, very strong in this current format. But, you know, of course, it can be kind of hit and miss as well as some strategies. Like, it's not going to do anything, right? Like something like, let's say, Kashtira, you're really not going to have a good time if you have a lot of Bestials. But, you know what, you do have a lot of decks like, you know, Dragonlink, like branded kind of variants, as well as like, you know, Unchained, of course. So Bestials can definitely have some really strong application in this current format again. Dimension Shifter, definitely a card that hopefully it gets hit on this next list. You know, you have a deck like Kashtira that's going to utilize this very well. Flunder is still kind of alive as well, as you saw in YCS Vancouver. At least 2 Flunder lists actually did top as well. So you know what, against most strategies, this card is very, very deadly. I think one of the things with Unchained, one of its strengths is that it doesn't necessarily fold completely to Shifter. But again, in that survey video that I keep referencing, they actually did still respect Shifter as a hand trap. I think, you know, it still can affect like their grind game and everything, so it's not like completely useless or anything. Against like Purrely as well, you know, Shifter can be very good if at least the Purrely players are going first. But when Purrely is going second, I was definitely told that Shifter is not actually that great against that strategy. And then we also have Effect Failure, speaking of Purrely actually, and also actually Chimera. This is probably going to see more play in those decks just because they're actually going to be drawing on like the opponent's turn, right? You know, with Purrely off the Sleepy Memories, and also like with Chimera with, you know, essentially Chimera Fusion and Guardian Chimera drawing. And they need something like Valor, which is more useful than something like Imperm in that scenario, just because Imperm will be kind of dead in your hand when you already control cards on the field, right? So Valor can definitely have some application in that regard. So next we have Ghost Spell, which I think is okay. I think, you know, obviously it can definitely come up against some of the key strategies right now, but I think for the most part, it's probably better if like you're a deck that kind of hard loses to something like Bestials. I think in that respect, then it's actually makes more sense for you to play it, because not only can you use it to stop like your opponent's plays, but at least you can also protect your own plays to go through. And then we also have Phantasme. This is a card that we haven't really seen too much of ever since we entered Master Rule 5, you know, essentially a little over 3 years ago. There was actually a brief moment, kind of in like the early days of the pandemic, where this actually came up again. I'm going to assume it was probably Dragonlink format. I can't really remember anymore. But, you know, right now we still have Dragonlink as well as something like Unchained. So Phantasme can definitely be really useful in that regard, just to be able to, you know, essentially shuffle back and fix your hand and just have a better chance going second, especially when you have a lot of really much more powerful board breakers nowadays compared to when Phantasme first came out. Next, we're going to move on to the most common side deck staples, and of course, we're just going to start with Feather Duster. Honestly, there's no drawbacks to this card, so why not just play it? So most lists are still playing this card. And then, of course, we talked about this earlier, Triple Tactics Talent. Really strong right now, you know, going first just punishes people for using hand traps, and again, as you saw, there's actually a pretty good amount of hand traps being played in this current format. And going second, this card is just almost always going to be live, you know, in like today's game, especially if your opponent has something that, you know, you cannot target, for example, and you have like a hard time outing that. This is kind of like the best way to just get rid of that. And then we have some books, Book of Moon and Book of Eclipse. Book of Moon was a little bit more played, at least among the lists that were available. And on top of that, if it was played, it's more of a main deck card compared to Eclipse, which, you know, it does see mostly main deck play, but a lot of side deck play as well. There's obviously pros and cons to both cards. Like Book of Moon, it's kind of a bit better if you're the one going first, because, you know, for the most part, you probably don't want to book your own monsters with Eclipse, unless you play a lot of link-based interruptions, of course. Book of Eclipse, of course, is better going second, can really shut down boards, although the downside is it can definitely kind of fold to Ash, which, as you saw, is actually played in almost every deck list. But another interesting thing with Book of Eclipse that I saw with like my friend Drew, who plays Hero, and, you know, obviously they have to respect Nib, is that, you know, you can actually Book of Eclipse and like flip your own monsters face down so that they don't get tributed off of Nib, which can potentially be, you know, a deal breaker in terms of like being able to pull out that win. And then we also have D-Barrier. Definitely this card hopefully gets banned, especially with Purrely being one of the best decks right now. You know, everyone's playing this just to call Xyz on them because it is very deadly. I also surveyed Purrely players actually, which you can also check out, and this card by far is like their greatest fear. And especially when you're playing something like Thrust, you know, you can even just get away with playing one of this in the side and just set it off Thrust and still have a lot of room left in your side deck. Next, we also have Lightning Storm, which is kind of interesting. I mean, obviously, with Unchained being the best deck, you don't really want to destroy their back row because you're just going to trigger some things. But I guess other than that, you know, you might as well play it again. Just really nice back removal. You also have Rescue Ace, which I guess didn't do too well in like the YCS Vancouver. But you know what? They do set multiple cards, and so I guess something like Lightning Storm can also be pretty useful as long as they don't have Ibli on your board. We also have Cosmic Cyclone, which kind of dipped actually compared to the last time I did this. I mean, I think it's still a really great card, just being able to banish, especially when you have certain things like, let's say, Unchained, or, you know, even like Purrely and, you know, their Happy Mary protecting some of their cards. Like, you know, being able to banish instead of destroying is really, really nice. With Chimera, I guess it's a little bit unfortunate, because even though, you know, Chimera Fusion can only be used in the main phase, and you can try to snipe it out in like draw or standby, but the problem is they have Cornfield, which can protect from like targeting effects, so it's not that great either, or at least in a lot of instances. And then we spoke about this earlier, is Thrust, arguably, you know, the best card in the game. Just being able to set a lot of like really deadly cards going first, like, you know, D-Barrier, Eradicator, even Destructive Daruma Cannon, which we'll get to a little bit. But going second, this card is really incredible, because it can just get you like Lightning Storm, evenly matched, you know, whatever, like, I guess Dark Ruler even. So really, really strong right now, and especially something like Tactics, I should even say, which can really swing things around. So next we have Herald of the Abyss, which I guess is another card you can search off of Thrust, and of course I guess that's probably why it saw more play than Xyz Encore. Xyz Encore actually saw play in 7 of the 49 lists that were available, so it's not going to make it in this video, but just wanted to give you a note of that. Herald of the Abyss, of course, you know, a lot of decks can have a hard time outing Purrely Noir, and so this is definitely one of the best ways to get rid of it. Now the downside though is that, let's say if they were to have, like the Purrely players, if they were to have set, let's say at least like a quick play spell and just summon like one of their smaller cats as a quick play, then they can actually just get rid of that instead of the Purrely Noir if they are facing against the Herald of the Abyss, so just keep that interaction in mind. We also have Evenly Matched, which again is a card that you could search off of Thrust. You know, it kind of saw a lot of decline in play compared to a few weeks ago, or even like the past couple of months, but I think it's still a really great card. I don't think that much has really changed. I mean, you know, of course, again, something like Unchained, it's definitely not super amazing, because you know, usually they can, let's say they keep the Caesar and then they just pop their other stuff and they just kind of come back after Evenly is resolved. You know, like Purrely, like, yeah, you're still not getting rid of the main issue, which is the Purrely Noir, but I guess you can at least get some of their, you know, back row, for example. Against Kashtira, I think this is really great, just being able to, you can evenly them for quite a number of cards, and they usually don't have an Omni Negate. Against Chimera, this is also quite great, especially because you know, pretty much all of their lists are not playing Sanctifier to give you a card to not be able to evenly, but I guess I know a lot of them are also playing Dragoon now, which they might set up, I guess, for potential something like Evenly Matched. So next we're going to move on to Kashtira Fenrir, and for this I'm actually not including any actual Kashtira decks, so this is essentially 12 lists that were non-Kashtira decks. Although think about it now, I guess in terms of, you know, let's say like Bestials, I had included those from Dragon Link, which in that case perhaps I should have actually not included Dragon Link decks for the Bestial count, just to keep it fair. So certainly let me know in the comments what you think about that. Nonetheless, Fenrir, very, very strong as just not, you know, outside of Kashtira. It was, you know, obviously this card came out before kind of like the full Kashtira support came out, and it was seeing a good amount of play, good going first and second, really puts that pressure, and also is a big body as well. And against, you know, certain floodgates aside from, you know, Skill Drain or Gravely Super Ancient Organism, like Fenrir can help you get out of those certain situations, like something like Goes In or Rivalry, for example, when you're locked, if you somehow get into that situation. So next we have Call by the Grave, which definitely has been seeing a lot of decline in play. I mean, I'm not sure if there's really a good reason for that. Like, we do see a lot of hand traps in the current format, of course, and you know, it can be good for other than just stopping hand traps, and especially something like, let's say like Unchained, they have a lot of graveyard stuff. I mean, I'm sure it's pretty good still, and so if you can manage to fit it in, I'm sure it's still worth your time. And then we have Destructive Daruma Cannon. So this is actually very popular lately. It's a card that was popular ever since kind of Thrust became, you know, kind of mainstream essentially, which is basically since release. So it essentially serves like another kind of book when you go first, and it's just a really strong card that you can set, and it can actually out a lot of problematic tower monsters as well. Next, speaking of tower monsters, we also have Kaijus to just get rid of the tower monsters, or even in the case of Unchained, for example, you know, at least you can get rid of cards without like destroying them. And even against something like Rescue Ace, let's say, like they do need their Rescue Ace monsters for their like traps to become live, so it's always really nice to have something like Kaijus if you can manage to fit them. And then lastly, we do have Change of Heart as our kind of like common side deck staple. And so, you know, it's a really strong card, I think, especially now, because, you know, with Unchained being the most represented deck, you really don't want to like destroy your opponent's card. So, you know, being able to like take control of your opponent's card and just like linking it away with something like Change of Heart is also very, very strong right now. And now, for the most part, if it was played, at least in the deck lists that were available, it was only side deck. Now keep in mind, you know, something like Dinkan Fam's Spriteless going second has been quite well known to play some powerhouse cards in the main, like Change of Heart. Of course, his list was actually not publicly available because he's going to be playing at YCS Cancun, so good luck to you. Now, in terms of finally, just to cap off some tech choices that I kind of noticed that we're seeing in like, you know, one to couple lists. We had something like Marionette Might, which at this point perhaps isn't really much of a tech choice because so many people have kind of found out about it and the market has gone a little bit wild, I guess. We also have Trap Tracks, not Trap Tricks. Definitely a card that I've never heard of before that we'll get to, and also Solemn Scolding, which I'm not too sure about actually. So of course, the Marionette Might really just kind of like for that Unchained matchup, just being able to take control. And also definitely don't forget to use code Hakuna5 for 5% off at either Card Brawlers or Tier 0 games, depending on where you live, for those Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles and sealed product. We also have Trap Tracks, which I guess is another card that, Unchained players can use. Essentially just a way to like not only destroy a monster that you control, but also just being able to set another trap directly from the deck. This was seen in a couple of the topping Unchained deck lists. And finally, this was a Solemn Scolding. This was seen in a top 32 Purrely decklist in the side. He only played one copy of it, so someone certainly let me know if I'm missing anything, if this is actually something that could be considered, or is it useful, is it not useful? Just another way to kind of stop a card as a counter trap. Seems like a hefty cost, but you know what do I know? Alright, so that was it for the breakdown of the most played hand traps as well as staples among the topping deck lists from the past YCS events. Hopefully you found that helpful. If some of you are going to YCS Cancun, best of luck to you. Hopefully this can help you prepare your main and side deck as well. So as usual, big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel. As always, a big thanks to all of you for watching, and well, take care guys.